LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We are the Uprising.
General Mark Milley, is he a traitor or a patriot or something in between? A full rundown of the judicially speaking spectacular outcome of the Backpage trial in Arizona, the death of America's greatest comedian, Norm MacDonald, and vaccine passports, all on this episode of The Uprising, and all with Liberty Nation's Tim Donner, who joins us now for the full hour. Once again on The Uprising podcast, joining us from
You're going to say parts unknown.
No, I was going to say Studio A. It's LibertyNation.com's senior political analyst, Timothy Elting Donner. Tim, welcome back to the program.
Always too much fun.
Okay. Tim, we're going to get right into it with the General Milley question. And before I find out what your thoughts are on the matter, I want to go to the official administration position. And let's go ahead and listen to what Joe Biden's thoughts are on the matter, or whoever controls what comes out of Jen Psaki's mouth, if it's one of the handlers or sub-handlers. Let's go ahead and listen to what Jen has to say.
In the national interest by circumventing a former president who he feared was acting erratically.
Well, it's the obligation of every chairman of the Joint Chiefs to follow constitutional orders to prevent unlawful military action. That's what the president believes. But it's also important to understand the context of when this reporting was happening during, and the fact that the former president was fomenting an insurrection, and there was broad concern from a range of members of his national security team about his behavior and fitness for office. And I know you all know and have reported on that context, but that is missing a little bit as people are discussing this.
So you think General Milley may have been acting patriotically by having these conversations?
Again, I'm not going to give further analysis other than to say that the president believes he's patriotic, that his fidelity to our Constitution is unquestionable, and he has complete confidence in him.
President Biden had a fuller conversation with General Milley about all this since the book's details were publicized yesterday?
I don't have any other further conversations to read out. Go ahead.
Even if the president believes that the intentions and the patriotism of General Milley were in line with his own values, is there a point where criticism makes General Milley unable to continue in this role because it is a new administration, it's a new day, and there are some questions about if he exceeded his authority?
Well, again, the president has complete confidence in his leadership, his patriotism, and his fidelity to our Constitution. I can't speak to the former president's experience with him or the former president's views of him, but this current president, who follows the Constitution, who's not fomenting an insurrection, who follows the rule of law, has complete confidence in Chairman Milley and him continuing to serve in his role.
And even as Republicans may criticize him and have questions about his suitability to continue, would that be a factor that President Biden would consider, separate from his judgment about how he conducted himself before?
I don't think the president is looking for the guidance of members of Congress who stood by while the president of the United States and the leader of their party fomented an insurrection, and many of them were silent. Go ahead.
You want to know my favorite part? Yeah, that's my favorite part.
It's got a good beat, but it's hard to dance to. That's the thing. No, I don't want to know your favorite part. I want to ask you two questions.
You don't want my opinion.
No, here's what I want to ask you.
To be a sponge. You want me to be Ed McMahon?
That's funny. No.
Here's
is Jen Psaki saying that Mark Milley didn't overstep his constitutionally prescribed duties of, not extending himself into making decisions that are the president's? Or is she saying that he did do that, but it was justified because of Orange Man Bad and, all the stuff?
I think that it's at this point, it doesn't matter because the call was made.
It doesn't matter. It totally matters.
Well, look, here's what matters. What matters is what I call the Trump exception, which is how many times over the last 4 years, including mostly with journalists, have we heard, well, this is Trump. This is an extraordinary
Regular rules
situation.
don't apply, right?
And if the
Is
regular
that what's
rules,
happening here? Is that
this
what's
is
happening?
not the usual constitutional order.
But answer
No.
the question: is Jen Psaki saying that that's what has happened here? This is a Trump rule situation, or
Yeah,
no?
she's still trying to stand on the ground that it's normal operating procedure, that General Milley would, in the course of things, have conversations with his Chinese counterpart. And that is true. Scotty would do that. The question is not the conversation itself, although the timing seems pretty clear to come right after January 6th, because I believe it was 2 days later. The question is, warning our military enemy or adversary or opponent, whatever you want to call him, which is China, warning them, telling them you're going to warn them if there is a nuclear strike,
Well,
or perhaps any other kind of strike.
or some other kind of move.
See, that's just, to me, whether that's a normal call that is within his normal purview, something that he does typically, nothing to see here. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what was said. And if what was said is, hey, I'll give you a heads up if we get the big one flying at you, that's treason. I mean, that's that is defined as treason.
Is it treason, or and let's not?
Or is it not treason because it was Trump? See, this is what they'll say.
Hold on, let me just back down for a second, and let's pause for a moment and recognize for those in the listening and viewing audience who don't know that we celebrate the Constitution every single moment of every single day on both the Uprising and LibertyNation.com. It is Constitution Day, Constitution Week, and
yes,
so this is a good time to discuss this. I think, Tim, that, and boy, you're going to maybe just hate me more for being a lawyer when I say it, because I know these aren't the arguments that you prefer, but it's not an act of treason, but it's a promise to commit treason in the future.
It's a treasonous statement, treasonous. And I'm not saying, look, I'm not going to drill down on the full legal definition.
No, but if I say to you,
treason,
I will call you if the bombs, the birds start flying, right, in your direction, I'm going to give you a heads up. But I never do it. Is that treason?
Well, there is an order of protocol that can settle this argument, Scott, because we're just sort of flapping here. We don't know what the formal written order of military protocol is in this case.
So we're not Yankee White certified.
But I think, it can. We go back to the point, like the journalist said, throughout the Trump era, they basically gave up their integrity. They gave up their any sense of objectivity. First, they denied it, then they admitted it, then they wore it as a badge of honor. And they said, well, because it's Trump, this is an emergency situation. All the rules are off. You cannot apply a constitution. It's not a suicide document. Brad even heard that one, right? So that we have to make exceptions in the case of a national emergency, which is what Trump was treated like. And a lot of people are going to say, by the letter of the law, as I understand it, what he did was a treasonous statement or act, depending on how you want to look at it. But it was extraordinary circumstances, so it's understandable. So we'll let him get away with it. Well, you know what? Here's the problem. You let him get away with it. What happens if you get a Republican president that wants to do the same thing? Will he do it? Well, sure, because it was done by General Milley under the guise of the Biden administration in 2021.
I totally understand.
Right?
I totally understand the danger there. I just don't know if there is. I would like to have General Milley under oath to be able to present him with those questions to say, because the treason calls were loud and often up front for what he did. And I don't mean to suggest there's no whiff of treason in what I think he has admitted to doing. But what he seems to have admitted to doing is just to say, I will, in some in the future commit treason, meaning it would be an act of treason, right, to do it. If I have to, that seems to be what he said.
Well, he's showing intent.
Yeah.
You can't say it's anything more than that, but it's not anything less than that either. To me, though, Scott, it's the composite picture of General Milley that led me to write an article calling for the resignation of him and Tony Blinken because of the gross incompetence of their actions in Afghanistan. And now, Scott, we have found out something that, much to our horror, we properly predicted on LibertyNation.com, which was after the disastrous withdrawal, that Joe Biden would pick a target somewhere in Afghanistan. In a dark of night, he would fire a missile, and he would kill some probably innocent person or maybe an actual ISIS-K operator. And he would say, okay, that's taken care of. We got the people that got us. We struck back with strength. And our prediction was, and I can tell you that myself and Lisa K. Donner, our editor-in-chief, and Graham Noble, who's one of our editors and author, we talked about it. We said, what do you want to bet? He unleashes, a drone strike in the middle of the night, and he'll hit some poor innocent.
There are military.
He'll hit some poor innocent Uber
There are
driver.
military distractions and there are political distractions.
Right, but we said he'd hit an Uber driver.
Yeah,
and that's pretty much exactly what he did. He hit an American aid worker who was probably working as an Uber driver on the side and killed 10 innocent civilians. Didn't kill a single ISIS-K operator. This on top of the disaster, on top of these questions, the fact that we're debating a serious debate about treason, Milley's got to go. I mean, come on.
Well,
how much do we need? How much do we need?
Let's talk about that for a second here. We're recording on the 18th of September. Let me ask you this. By November 1, let's put a date on it. Jen Psaki says Milley's got the full confidence of the elected president of the United States.
And that's
reassuring. It doesn't matter what Trump says. So let me ask you this. Let's give him a month and a couple of weeks here. Is he in the job come November, or does he decide to spend more time with his family in about 10 days and decide to wrap down his career given these revelations?
Well, I kind of think right before Thanksgiving would be a good time because people won't notice as much, perhaps late on a Friday afternoon, but that's
right there. Wait, let's just stop it right now. You're a genius. It's the Wednesday before Thanksgiving that they release the news.
It's the old. It's like the Friday 3 p.m. release on steroids. If you think no one will notice on the Friday at 3 p.m. when they're heading out for the weekend, they really won't notice Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
All right. Well, we will. We'll continue to monitor and.
Yeah, I mean, look, Scott, he's a disgrace. He's a political general. He is one of the generals, one of the type of generals that Donald Trump talked about in his campaign when he had the audacity to say, well, you have the real generals and the battlefield generals, and then you have the political generals, the political hacks. Unfortunately, it was Trump who appointed Milley as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 2018. So he unfortunately made the appointment of a man who turned out to be the ultimate political general.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and shift gears entirely, Tim. This story has animated me for years, and it reached some sort of denouement this week. And I use that word for your benefit, Tim.
Very impressive. Wow, that is just. Could you repeat it for emphasis?
This is the back page story.
I always thought it was denouement.
The big news is mistrial declared by federal judge Brnovich in the back page trial. Tim, it's very surprising that they got a mistrial. If you think about a federal trial, it's a small symphony in terms of all the people that have to come together to kind of make that happen, between the judge's staff, the various attorneys and their staffs, the jury, the courthouse stuff, like, to get it started. And the reason why it was a mistrial, just for everybody's information, the guys who, Backpage was a classified advertising site seized by the federal government because of allegations that it supported prostitution. They never have been able to successfully make any of those charges in court against Backpage's founders. Backpage's founders have always been able to say, we run a classified site. Some people do use that site to advertise sex services. We wish they wouldn't do it for illegal purposes. We have measures in place to try to make them stop it. Well, we don't say it's never happened or doesn't happen. We just say we try to take steps to make sure that it doesn't happen. But, you know, some people buy a bottle of liquor and go drive down the road with it and run into, you know, a group of people standing on the corner of the road. Some people have, you know, nice cocktails at a fancy party. You know, the person who sells the thing doesn't always control what's done with the thing. And the federal government, instead of trying to do what they said, basically what they've done is they prosecuted these two guys, Lacey and Larkin, Tim, over these kinds of, like, remember you used to see these charges of like interstate transportation of somebody for like immoral purposes. Well, that was a way for the federal government to kind of get in on morals charges where there otherwise wasn't a federal law to do so. And that's sort of how they shoehorned their way into prosecuting
those things that appeal to prurient interests.
Yeah. And so what they've said is that the Backpage founders basically, they furthered regular prostitution in some states, some acts of prostitution, some sales of prostitution, and they're pandering, I guess is the legal term. And so they're therefore guilty of this federal charge that accompanies with it. It's before the RICO stuff really got rolling. There's one of those statutes called the Travel Act, okay? But that's not what they did in court. What they did in court was, and they flew in, and I mentioned this in my own coverage of the trial for LibertyNation.com, the sponsor of today's program, the listener and viewer source for conservatarian news and analysis, Tim, 24/7, 365, that instead of that, what they did was they just talked about child sex trafficking, which is, of course, the worst possible thing, you know, you can ever imagine somebody doing to somebody, right? And they made it out like these people on trial were somehow responsible for child sex trafficking. They actually brought in a victim of child sex, like a victim survivor who's now, you know, significantly older than when she was trafficked, to testify as to what happened to her. And her mother was brought in to testify. And you might think, like, you know, if you, Tim, right now were on trial for aiding terrorism because you sent money off. In fact, I happen to know somebody closely related to you is Lebanese. And so maybe they
well, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Sorry.
God,
I know.
Jeez.
You're not going to be quite as
We
welcome.
weren't supposed to tell people that.
You have ethnic in your universe, but you do. But let's say you wrote a check to some Lebanese social, you thought was some Lebanese like social group or like civic organization, and it turns out they were a bunch of terrorists, right? So the FBI is like prosecuting you for aiding terrorism, and they bring some widow and orphan from 9/11 to testify like at your trial about how horrible the terrorism has impacted them.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're charged about writing a check to some Lebanese organization in 2021. How is it relevant to have a widow and orphan from 9/11? Well, Tim, they are victims of terrorism,
right.
And the FBI is alleging you of terrorism. So that's the strength. That is the very, very not even
right.
thin branch.
But isn't that the customary course of procedure for lawyers? And what I mean is to sue everybody, to go after everybody,
criminal,
everybody down the line. You go to the smallest
you're
person involved to the highest level.
You're thinking of a civil strategy for money. You just sue everybody. You hope that somebody can
right. But you go after the places where you think you can win. Right.
But a criminal trial is not supposed to do that. And as the judge said when she dismissed the charges, it's a huge thing for a motion to dismiss to be granted in like day 4 of a federal trial. That almost never happens. The motions come out, but even if a motion, just to like give you a sense of how odd it is, even if like that's what a judge should do, usually because of all the resources that have been brought to bear to bring this case to trial, what would happen is the judge would take that motion under advisement, and they may grant a motion to dismiss after all the evidence has been presented. So if it's true that the case should be dismissed, it's like, all right, well, we've got witnesses that have flown in from around the country to testify. All the work's been, ready to come to a head. Let's let it come to a head, get the trial done with, and then I can rule on this motion. But she didn't do that. And that's how bad this behavior was. And it wasn't just go after anybody. It was alleged that they've done this most horrible thing. I mean, you can't even imagine what a juror is supposed to think after days of hearing literally, these horrible victims come up and cry and talk about their horror. Now, they never then say that man did it or that they allowed it, but that's the implication. That's why the judge had to cut it off completely.
Well, I mean, if you're going to try to make a case, you always want to present the most spectacular evidence. You always want to have the weeping child, if possible, to play on the emotion.
And if you don't have it, just bring one in. And
it's just like when they had the January 6th hearing on Capitol Hill. They picked the two most tragic stories to head, their narrative so that they could horrify people enough and freeze them to the actual facts of what happened, what didn't happen, what was provable, and what wasn't. But you always want to bring forward any kind of emotion that might really impact the jury, right?
The Backpage story, I think, is where it is because of how heroic the people who go after Backpage get to portray themselves.
Right.
And that does not survive the kind of two-step thinking that I know that you like to appreciate in your analysis. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and play that clip from Washington State's KRO7 on Backpage's seizures, implications, and consequences.
Up until April, Lisa and other prostitutes relied on Backpage.com to advertise. When the Justice Department forced the website to shut down in April, Seattle's sex workers flooded Aurora Avenue, looking for customers in what's become a buyer's market.
The prices have gone down, like tremendously. Like, it's crazy. Like, they'll offer me like $10 to have sex.
Michaela Noble is 20 years old.
Well, I've been on the street since I was 15 years old.
An addiction to meth and heroin keeps her on the street.
Girls that are only out here to get their fix, every money they get, they'll spend their money on drugs.
I usually always have a knife in me.
But Marissa and others maintain much of their personal protection ended.
It's a lot more dangerous. This is way more dangerous.
When Backpage shut down.
It's because you don't know who's going to pick you up. Every time I get in a car, I risk my life, so.
Whereas before you had their phone number?
Exactly. I could screen them, and I knew, pretty much wherever, where they were, and, it was a lot more honest.
Maya has been on the streets for 10 years.
Obviously, I'm on heroin.
She's never seen it like this.
When they thought eliminating Backpage was making the street safer, actually, they did not make the street safer.
Absolutely not.
And we heard that over.
There's more pimps and there's more guys out here.
And over again.
It's just like a way different of a crowd that's been like, that I see come through here compared to Backpage. A lot of dangerous, strange men.
It made the sex trade, prostitution, very, very anonymous.
Seattle.
They wrap themselves in this hero blanket that they're saving women generally, and young women especially. And the exact opposite is true. Backpage provided a one-stop shop for law enforcement and those who help victimized people to try to get help and to get them from not being continued victims. But that doesn't go with the narrative. You don't get to go to court and say, I did this, but really I actually hurt all these people, all these dozens and thousands of women that, I proclaim to help.
Well, please Lord, save us from those who would save us. I mean, the do-gooders, the posturers, the DAs, district attorneys general, who are seeking higher office, virtue signaling by getting a cheap headline, which, again, like you said, the one-step thinking is perfect. They think, shut down a place where prostitutes are freely available.
Right.
Sure, that sounds great to the public. Sounds great for his Q rating.
Yeah.
Say all of that. But they don't think that through. Why do you think people don't trust government?
Yeah, thank God.
I mean,
they need to not. Did you know that Kamala Harris? I feel like this Backpage story for sometimes a story just grabs you, and it's like it's somehow a microcosm of so many other things that are. That's the way the Backpage. Kamala Harris. There's a cop who testified in the Backpage case. He's a California state investigator who worked for Kamala Harris, and she had him arrest these Backpage guys twice, and both times the arrests were thrown out because there wasn't a valid criminal law to charge them on because they didn't.
He's tough on crime, Scott.
He's tough on crime. She didn't care, Tim. She didn't care that these people.
No, it's all
weren't actual criminals. She got to stand up there and be a hero and talk about how she was a hero.
And use that as part of the statistics to show how tough on crime she was when she was Attorney General of California. This Backpage story is to me a perfect illustration of the complications and how difficult it is to create a system of ordered liberty, because you have to have order, but you have to have liberty, and it's a clash between institutional control and the liberty of individuals, which we talk about all the time. But this is like a something easier to see the direct impact. This story that we just played, where now, the fallout from one-step thinking. Oh, they're allowing prostitutes to go on that site. Simple solution: just shut down the site. That's typical government thinking.
The other thing that drives me kind of nuts about this is that only libertarians seem to be particularly animated about this case. And what I mean is, because there's prostitution involved, and make no mistake about it, I don't proclaim that Lacey and Larkin, it's like gambling going on at Casablanca. I'm shocked. Like
and you make a good point too. You lurched uncontrollably into an excellent related point, which is that. And I'm shocked at it because, as you know, I watch a lot of baseball and a fair amount of football too. And to see the way that gambling has partnered with professional football leagues, that was, especially baseball, where we had the Black Sox scandal, 102 years ago?
Yeah.
And it was always verboten. Gambling was something that wasn't to ever have baseball sully their hands with it. And now they have a partnership with it. And it's sort of like, well, if gambling, which was so bad, is suddenly pretty much just fine, and we've now legalized it. In how many states have legalized casino gambling, sports betting, the whole thing? I mean, Vegas hardly, and Atlantic City. 30 years ago was Vegas and Atlantic City. Now it's everywhere.
Right.
But if we're having this very broad liberal view of gambling, then it seems to me that's exactly what we're probably headed for with prostitution too, which is that it's better to make it legal and control it and profit from it than to have it exist in the seedy underworld, as we saw.
It's certainly better
right there.
It's for amongst adults. All consensual behavior amongst adults should not come with any criminal prohibition attached to it. But for this thing, I feel like the conservatives aren't into it because they did benefit from prostitution, and they don't support that. And for some
wait a minute, I'll back that up. Back that up a minute, Skippy.
Sure.
What was that statement?
That the conservatives aren't rallying around Lacey and Larkin, and proclaiming that this is a victory for justice in the face of overburdensome government because they got money from prostitution. So they don't have the great
Wait a minute. What do you
conservative.
mean? Explain what you mean. They got money from prostitution.
They sold these ads on their website and people bought them to promote prostitution. So if you look at the coverage of the Backpage trial right now, who's tweeting about it, who's writing about it and broadcasting about it, we don't have the normal folks who would celebrate and be all about a defendant overcoming a blatant rules violation, a constitutional law violation by the Department of Justice against somebody.
So
Dan Bongino is not out there talking about this. Why
but
not?
you're saying, wait a second now. You're saying conservatives are being bought off.
No, not bought off. I think that their mores are retarding their interest.
So you're saying that that conservatives are pro prostitution.
No, the opposite.
That they're anti.
I'm saying to him that the defendant's involvement in getting money from prostitution is acting as a retardant for conservatives to then come to their aid at trial and rally around this, like I think it should be.
Here's the problem. No.
Oh, I gotta make this point.
There's a deeper problem here.
Because the flip side that I'm seeing is that the liberals aren't doing it either. So the normal people who you would see who would not only just allow prostitution, but would celebrate it with some, dance recital at Brown College about the freedom that it involves, or something.
That's Brown University.
At some.
Don't get it wrong. It's a high. It's an Ivy League institution, Scott.
In a co-production with Sarah Lawrence, where it's some fulfillment of some woman's whatever to be paid for. Those folks too also seem to be not supporting
this kind of thing happens.
So it's just, I see like the libertarians doing it. So anyway,
yes, and here's why. Because you see this happen often. And I'll harken back to the fall of Afghanistan and the fact that you had these Muslims overrunning people and re-enslaving women. What did that do for Democrats? It put them in a bind between the rights of women and the rights of Muslims who they protect. Now, in this case, conservatives are drawn between the morality that prostitution is wrong and anything we do to limit it is good. And they're caught between that and how much they hate the heavy hand of government. So they're caught in a vice grip of, in this particular case, whether it's something they're going to celebrate or something that they're going to condemn. So as a result, they simply remain silent. Whereas libertarians are not burdened by the same kind of sense of morality that needs to be enforced to some degree. No, libertarians are into the individual transactions between people should be steeped in liberty.
That is
absolutely.
Morality,
and here's the problem: is that conservatives don't understand too often that in the word libertarian is what? Liberty. Yes. It's about liberty. The Constitution is about liberty. The country is about liberty. What set us apart as a nation is liberty. But conservatives, they don't talk as much about individual liberty as I would like to see. They talk about the overreach of government. They talk about in individual instances, they will talk about liberty. But for libertarians, it's pure liberty. And this is a violation of pure liberty.
Have come along on drugs for the most part, I think. So maybe they will
dragging and screaming.
Maybe they will come along on this as well. One thing is for sure, there is no answer to this question that doesn't involve, if you want to keep criminalizing the people that that both sides basically say they want to help, which is these young women who would be victims. Mr. Lacey and Larkin, by capitalizing on it, this is the other thing that I just want to
see. And just to complete
this point, one of the things that Lacey and Larkin have done is, and this is sort of the dream of libertarians in terms of, it's not just about our right to do something. By exercising their right to profit from this and using the profit motive, what they've actually done is created a safer place for victimized people. It's sort of the miracle of the market in many ways. And I just want that to be recognized. It's recognized in so few places.
Well, you have, as libertarians, you have less constraints on what you're allowed to support and oppose, as if you're, and to complete the sort of analysis of why people are staying silent. Now, the right, roughly speaking, or conservatives are staying silent, as we said, because of the conflict between two of their sort of conflicting ideals. And liberals, leftists, can't really say much because they don't want to be seen in support of prostitutes, because that just plays into the whole sense that the left is immoral and that they support immorality and they want to tear down basic moral norms of the country. So they can't afford to be outspoken about it either.
They don't even have the sophistication to understand it's a First Amendment issue. It has nothing whatsoever to do with
it. No, it's all perception, Scott. That's the sad thing. It's all perception.
Yeah.
I mean, because look at the perception. Joe Biden got elected on a perception that has turned out to be completely false. Competence, right?
Let's go ahead and
bring the adults back.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mentioned this on social media this week, Tim, and you could say anything you want about the loss in Afghanistan, about any of the other, the tragic loss of the value of the dollar and the inflation cost for Americans and what that does to destroy liberty. But you can't show me from January 21st to September 18th, a single mean tweet that has been authored by the President of the United States.
That's a
promise kept.
That will assure his reelection. I feel confident.
Let's go ahead and move on to with a laugh, but I think, Tim, the best comedian has died. Norm MacDonald is shuffled off this mortal coil.
You liked him that much, huh?
Oh my God!
Did you?
I'll just go ahead and say the man went on The View. Now, anybody who listens and watches The Uprising knows what we think of The View. And the man went on The View and basically to stick it in Barbara Walters' eye. So he goes on The View. He had previously, and I saw him talk about the why that this happened. And we're gonna play the clip in just a minute. But he goes on The View, and he had previously met George Herbert Walker Bush, or no, George W. Bush, excuse me.
Yes.
He had previously met W and just shook his hand and had like a photo op with him. But he's not like he's not like an Alec Baldwin for the right or something like that. He just met this guy, and he's a political celebrity, and Norm will tell you like he doesn't know anything about policy, but he wanted to go and meet him. So they made it out like, hey, what's this photograph with you? Meanwhile, they would never do that with a comedian with a Democrat.
No, of course not. They would, and they would, and then the audience would applaud.
Yeah. Oh, look out! Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful! He supports Hillary.
Dave Chappelle and Barack Obama. How awesome is that? So Norm decides to have fun with them and screw with Barbara Walters. Here we go.
Okay, Norm, you're Canadian.
Yes, I am.
So what do you think of this whole presidential mess?
Well, I hope that the Democrats don't steal the election from the winner, but who knows?
You like George Bush, don't you?
I love George Bush, man. He's a good man, decent, none of this. He's not a liar, a crook, murderer, or anything like that. So it'd be good to get I think we should get the homicide out of the White House and get like a a fresh start, because we don't want any more murderers.
I think we should just go on to the next question.
Oh.
Who are the murderers? Yeah.
Oh, Clinton, he murdered a guy.
Yeah, you know, we're not allowed to, you're not allowed to put out accusations without.
That's a little too far.
That's the way it does work.
Let's just go on to the next question.
Yeah.
This is not my week. What can I tell you?
Oh, it's not mine either, and I'm being very nice, okay? Be a good boy. Now, Norm.
Do you never hear that?
No. Listen, we don't need to talk
want to get
about
into
that.
this, and I don't want to hear it, and this is not the place to make those accusations, and you're supposed to be funny. Let's get on to the next question. So get with it.
There you go.
This is a live show.
Not for nothing, Norm, but you have been properly chastised by Barbara, so I'm now going to ask the next question.
I thought it was a matter of record.
Shut up. Shut up. Look,
Okay.
let me do this, okay?
I'll tell you what's a matter of record. You will not be invited back if you don't shut up. All right, now. Let's talk football.
All right, manslaughter.
Let's talk football.
Norm, come on, Norm. Tell him, Norm.
People always told me Hollywood was like incredibly liberal and biased, and I thought it was untrue. But
You want to talk about the millionaire?
To start it in the first place as a bit that he hadn't prepared just because of their reaction to his photograph, to stick it to Walters is one thing. But then when he comes around with the defensive, I thought it was common knowledge. That to me is just, oh boy.
Yeah, you know, the grainy quality of that clip reminds me of how long this wretched program has been on the air.
So we're
My
supposed
God.
to honor Norman.
How long is that? How long has that thing been going on? How long
By
has
the
this
way,
been going
it's a
on?
juggernaut. You think of how much money Barbara Walters has cashed out of that. That's no joke.
It just it makes me.
You're turning this into a dystopian segment on American Entertainment Society, where we have to think about how little money.
Let's just put it this way, Scott. Let's just put it this way. When I start to think at all deeply about the viewing audience and the size of it for The View,
yeah,
it makes me depressed to the point where I literally have to.
All right, well, let's not
take measures.
Let's not drag down our non-depressive, beautiful, lively Uprising audience with.
Oh yes. Okay, we're up.
All right, let's go ahead with an exit question here. We haven't actually talked about, and just because of the way the stories have been falling, it just hasn't made the queue in a way that and this is probably not what it deserves, but we haven't talked about COVID passports on the Uprising.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go ahead. I don't think I'm going to shatter any expectations when I say that I think it's completely outside the bounds of what should be allowed in this country, what Americans, and just for a second, let's not talk about what can be done or legally be done, but where we should be. The idea, like the spirit of America has to be vehemently against the idea of papers, please, doesn't it? Am I too much of a child of the Cold War that's where my mind goes with this and rejects it?
No, you're not. This is something unlike we've ever seen in this country, the concept of it. And I think it's creepy. And I think everybody I've talked to believes that it's pretty creepy. Brings to mind the entry gate between East and West Berlin.
Brandenburg Gate.
The Brandenburg Gate, which I actually was able to visit a few years ago. And, you know, having to show your papers, you see it in the movies, papers, please, you know, creating a two-tier society. I don't pretend to understand why the people that aren't getting vaccinated. I think everybody has their own reasons for ranging from pure fear of a needle to legitimate health concerns to horror stories from other people that took
the idea that one person should say to another. I mean, I don't want to get too far into that because we risk deplatforming, and that's another thing, by the way. That is how they have their thumb on the scales. You know, we have to be careful what we say because we have large distribution partners that will restrict content that mentions this in a way that they disfavor. Let me play this clip because I think it just shows what ignorance.
Well,
will be
let's
allowed.
just put it this way, though, in terms of the people that aren't vaccinated. I wrote another piece that shatters the narrative that's been set by the mainstream media about the
Seem
non-vaccinated.
to disappear in libertynation.com and the pages of the self-same website,
Correct.
where you are senior political analyst.
Thank you so much. Give me my due respect for once. Anyway, it's okay. So the narrative being presented by the media from the Biden administration, they're basically considering themselves the bullhorns for the administration. When it comes to vaccine, they take whatever the administration says and they treat it as gospel. So the narrative is that it's these Trump anti-vaxxers, Trump-inspired anti-vaxxers, these rebels who are doing this just to kind of crush Biden, that they're doing it because they hate Biden and they know that if he can't solve the pandemic, that he won't remain president for long, right? And so, yes, there's some high-profile anti-vaxxers that are in what you might call the Trump orbit or the conservative orbit or the libertarian orbit, whatever. The free market orbit is the umbrella I'll use. But when you look at the numbers, okay, the charge that it is white people and mostly Trump supporters who are spreading the coronavirus because they refuse to get vaccinated flies in direct contradiction to the facts, which were uncovered by NBC, the 5-month period since the beginning of the Biden administration. Only 15% of all the vaccines have gone to Black people who continue to come in way behind white people in terms of vaccination, and Hispanics too. But here's the point: you can't say on the one hand, okay, that and by the way, this is in the light of a single-minded, equity-based vaccination program that the Biden administration started. They set up vaccination centers in marginalized neighborhoods across the country, and in middle-class neighborhoods as well. And they found that Black people just aren't showing up to take the vaccine, which is, I'm not going to sit here and blame Black people for the coronavirus, continuing to extend itself. But for the Biden administration to say it's a handful of extreme anti-vaxxers, and it's these Trumpists who are causing, and most of these people, by the way, live rural, where and they spend a lot of time outdoors. They're not spreading the coronavirus.
Idea that somebody in the middle of Arkansas has got 10 acres, that they present the same risk as somebody tightly packed into the south side of Chicago is
the other thing, and the other point of my article is that it's an admission of failure, because when they started this vaccination program, they said the really almost sole purpose was, since white people pretty much could navigate their own way to get the vaccination, Black people and Hispanic people needed their help in the usual paternalistic sense. So they set up the single-minded goal of bringing up the numbers, the percentages of Blacks and Hispanics who are being vaccinated, and they failed.
The worst.
They have failed, and that's a major failure.
The more tightened society gets around the vaccinated, the more it will exclude at a disproportionate level Black and brown people, which of course is what we're told that those folks.
So then again, there's
their own efforts.
There's the conflict. There's the conflict of constituencies, right? Because Black people,
absolutely.
if you're going to quote blame someone, well, Black people that live in densely populated urban areas, if you want to point a finger of blame, their failure to get their vaccination rate up is probably as responsible or more responsible than anything else. Okay. But you can't say that, right? And I'm not saying they should be demonized. They have their own reasons for not taking the vaccine like everybody else, like Scott, as I point out. The Tuskegee, how about the Tuskegee experiment?
The harder people sell it, the more the more skeptical a rational person should be.
I think you're right.
If I have something great and I say, hey, try this thing, it's great, and I push it on you every second I can, and every day of the week, at some point you think, this thing may not be so great, or else, people just come to it by themselves. But I want to play this one clip.
I was just going to say, to the point of why Black people may not trust a government-issued vaccine. Ever heard of the Tuskegee experiment? If you haven't, it's when treatment was withheld from a heavily Black community, I think 100% Black community, for the treatment of syphilis. And it was a disaster. And it's a widely shared story in the Black community.
Lifelong suffering at the hands of the government abusing Blacks.
That's correct. So do they have reason? Do they have reason?
Treatment.
But there's the assumption. But there's the assumption, since the Democrats are running this program and it's old Uncle Joe, that of course they're going to fall in line because they always do. We tell them what to do and they do it. And now they're not. What are they going to do now?
This is the kind of statement that is allowed out there about the right to travel.
I absolutely think we should have that requirement. I think it was a major oversight on the part of the Biden administration to not issue this yesterday. And we have to talk about the reason. The reason isn't so much that we need to keep our train travel and plane travel even safer. They are pretty safe, although I definitely think that having a vaccine requirement would make it even safer and probably encourage many people who are vaccinated or who have young kids and want to protect them. Maybe it'll help to encourage those people to start traveling again. But there's an even bigger reason too, which is I think we really need to make it clear that there are privileges associated with being an American, that if you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated. Travel and having the right to travel interstate, it's not a constitutional right as far as I know to board a plane. And so saying that if you want to stay unvaccinated, that's your choice. But if you want to travel, you better go get that vaccine.
Privileges to being an American, but in order to enjoy those privileges, you have to get vaccinated. Does she even realize the absurdity of that statement?
And just so everybody, if you don't know and you're listening,
this is the usual one-step thinking.
Every privilege you get for being an American is yours for being an American. You don't have to like serve in the military and then you get to be a citizen with all.
But they act as if those rights are at the pleasure of the government.
That's exactly right. And that's the kind of misinformation. By the way, there is a right to travel. This is a person who used to head Planned Parenthood. I want you to think about the kind of mind that can think.
If there wasn't, wouldn't we see border gates between Kansas and Missouri?
Think of the mind that can read the Constitution and not see a right to travel there, but see a right to surgical abortion for this document that was written, right, hundreds of years ago, before that procedure was even invented. All right. We're going to keep up with you in the pages of LibertyNation.com and hope that your schedule allows you to reappear once again on the Uprising soon. Tim Donner, thanks so much for joining us. It's been
always a pleasure, Scott. Love it. Thanks.
In addition to being just hilariously funny generally, one of the things that I think did make Norm MacDonald both one of the funniest comedians and somebody whose comedy was instrumental to liberty is that he suffered no hypocrites. And totalitarian regimes cannot handle the exposure of their hypocrisy. It's one of the stops, one of the reasons why free speech that's not some sort of ivory tower paper helps liberty. There's a movie called Hammer and Tickle out there, and it exposes how the joking about the real life behind the Iron Curtain during the Soviet Union helped denigrate that regime and helped it crumble because they couldn't stop the jokes about how the real the things were. And that's why I think humor is so important and why refusal to grant a hypocrite the cover of their hypocrisy is important. And that's why we celebrate Norm MacDonald on this episode of The Uprising. All right, that's it for this week. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, Liberty Nation Radio, the Rabbit Hole podcast, as well as our signature television series, The Conservative Five. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for listening or watching. This program is a production of libertynation.com. Conservative news where truth matters.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.
We are the Uprising.